Hey guys, Adam from realworldworship.org here, and we're a blog for everyday, ordinary worship leaders who are part of extraordinary, everyday churches, and we're trying to tackle the questions that people in average churches ask. So one of the questions we got sent in was from a reader named Edwin, which I thought was a fantastic question that would be applicable to a lot of church electric guitar players, and so I wanted to address it. I think church bass players or even acoustic guitar players who use a pedal board might find this helpful. He asked a few questions, but they're all linked, and first he asked, how many overdrive pedals do I need? And that's a great question, because kind of the stereotypical Instagram church pedal board, right? You have a compressor, and that's followed by like 2 to 3 low gain, what we call transparent overdrive pedals, and then it goes on into delays and reverbs. How many do you really need? I think it's going to depend. It's going to depend on your amp and your guitar setup. It's going to depend on what you're trying to accomplish. So there's no right or wrong answer. The first thing I would ask is, where are you getting your gain from, and what are you trying to accomplish? So if you I just need something so that when it comes to the solo or the bridge, we're really trying to punch it in, then I get forward in the mix, or I get that extra bit of boost or oomph to get what I need to accomplish sound-wise. Then you really only need one. If you have your bass tone and then you turn that on for a solo or something, you really only need one. If you are looking for a sort of a clean tone, and then I like to add the overdrive pedal for certain songs, and then we come to that point in the bridge where I still need a little more, then you would need a second one. I think the thing to be careful of is needless repetitivity. And so like if you have 3 low gain overdrive pedals and then you say, well, I'm going to stack them to create a higher gain sound, you'd actually be better off with 1 low gain or transparent overdrive and then 1 medium to high gain distortion, overdrive, or fuzz to do the job better. I really do believe, like for example, if you're trying to stack 2 or 3 pedals together to achieve a higher gain tone, you'd be better off with 1 pedal, like a Walrus Audio Red, maybe a JHS Superbolt at certain settings, than you would by stacking 3 lower gain pedals. A lot of the reason for that goes into Edwin's second question. His second question is, what's a good combination of overdrives for stacking? Now, stacking is what we call it when you have 3, 4, just 2, whatever, multiple overdrive pedals in a row, and you turn them all on and you stack them together to create a sound. The thing is that overdrive pedals and distortion pedals and all kinds of gain pedals are not just gain pedals or volume pedals, but they're also EQ or equalization. And all of them have that, right? If it's just the simple TS9 tube screamer with its tone control, or if it's something more complex like on the Matthews Effects Architect version 2 that has the 3-band mids, lows, and highs, the 3-band EQ, there is equalization happening. So if you're stacking pedals, whatever pedal is last in your signal chain or furthest from your guitar, that's going to be the dominant EQ control. So if you're using, for example, like a JHS Twin 12, you want that amp in the box kind of sound, but then you stack a tube screamer and a like a clone or whatever right after it, right? That first pedal, the Twin 12, you're not going to get the full effects of that amp in the box EQ that pedal is designed for, because you've got 2 EQ or equalization circuits after it, plus any EQ that's going on later in your chain. So when you're saying what's a good combination of pedals, well, it's going to depend on need and preference. And when you say how many do I need, it may be that you only need 1 for what you're doing, and it may be that you think you need 3 or 4 to accomplish something, but by stacking 3 pedals together, you're creating a really muddy EQ that was never intended to be like that. And if you had 1 pedal that did the same thing, you would then have better equalization control. How many do you need? That's going to depend on your situation. I am going to say, though, that I think most church players need less than they think they do. I would actually say that given the right circumstance and setting up the correct rig, most church players could get away with one overdrive pedal total. What's a good combination though? That's going to be trial and error, and you're just going to want to take into account which pedal is furthest from my guitar or last in the signal chain, and that will determine the dominant equalization control for your signal chain. He then asks, do I need to color my clean sound, and if so, how? Because he had seen a video on YouTube where a guy said he was doing it using a TS9. So what that guy was talking about, Edwin, was equalization. And if you have an amp that is very, very bright, I've heard Brian Wampler on the Chasing Tone podcast talk about this, where he thinks the Vox AC30 is too bright, but he likes a tube screamer in front of it because he feels that the tone control set right darkens it to make it a more pleasing sound. If you are coloring your tone, if you have a very dark amp and so you use a bright EQ circuit in a gain pedal, then you bring brightness to the tone for what's an otherwise dark amp or a darker, or what we might call a muddier pickup. You know, I think the JHS Morning Glory, for example, is fantastic on kind of darker or muddier humbuckers. I think it brings some brightness and some clarity there because of, again, the equalization and the way that the circuit's used. The other thing that somebody might mean, though, when they talk about coloring your sound is they might be talking about grit or clipping or breakup. When somebody says they push their amp to the edge of breakup, there is a point on tube amps where they don't really get louder. The tubes just get more saturated. They're more compressed. They start to clip in what's generally a musical or pleasing way. But they don't actually get louder. For example, on my amp, once you get past about 10, 11 o'clock on the knob, for the volume control, it's not actually getting louder. It's just starting to compress and sag and saturate and distort more. And it's really, after that point, it's just a question of how much do I want it to be saturated. So if you have a very, very clean amp, for example, Fender Twin 12 or a Fender Hot Rod DeVille, these are high wattage, high headroom. That means they can get very loud without getting saturated or without breaking up. And if you have a very, very clean amp, somebody might keep a tube screamer or a clone or something always on because they are looking for a little bit of grit, a little bit of clipping, a little bit of breakup or saturation that their amp just cannot do at what we would call reasonable volume levels. There's just no way to get your amp that loud for what you're trying to accomplish. So somebody might be saying, I'm coloring my tone using a tube screamer because they're talking about EQ, but somebody also might be saying, I'm coloring my tone using a gain pedal because they're trying to achieve something that's not possible for their amp. And that's what I think is important to consider. Do I have the right setup? If you run two AC15s in stereo, that does not mean that you have an equal wattage or volume to one AC30. And I've heard people think that, right? Put two AC15s in stereo, 15 plus 15 is 30, and then you have the equivalent of a 30-watt Vox amp. That's not true. You will have a similar sound, but the AC15s, both of them in stereo, will break up or saturate quicker than an AC30 would. You're not going to get the same tone just because you've doubled in 2 amps of wattage and they add up to 30. So that can be good or bad. But if you're in a setting, especially if you can't have your amps off of stage or anything like that, you might have an amp that's far too clean. You might need something like a Vox AC4 or a Fender Blues Junior or a Pro Junior because they are a lower wattage amp. You're going to get a little grit a lot quicker, and then you're able to, at reasonable volumes, have a clean tone that's not completely clean. It's already there. And then you don't need that much. If you then use one overdrive, it doesn't take that much to boost or to take you where you need to go. I tend to do this with my clean tone. My clean tone on my 15-watt Benson Monarch is not 100% clean. I don't want it 100% clean. I have a little bit of grit, a little bit of bite. And then when I turn on my Matthews clone, then boom, I'm there. I don't need much more. Now, For solos and bridging, though, that's a problem, because if I, in a chorus, or if a song just already needed grit, it's an upbeat opening song and I've got the overdrive pedal on, what if I need just that little extra bit? That's where actually a clean boost comes in, something that has a very neutral EQ, something that doesn't add a lot of gain. It's just adding neutral EQ'd volume. And that's what I look for there. If I have room, maybe you put a clean boost on. Maybe you look for a pedal that already has it. I'm thinking about like Full Tone Full Drive 2, which is a fantastic pedal, JHS Kilt, all kinds of options where there is an extra boost that is on board, ready to go. You don't have to add another pedal. King of Tone from Analog Man comes to mind as a great option for this. I think again the Full Drive 2 or the Full Tone GT 500 are both great options that have an onboard boost if you need that little extra punch without adding a lot of EQ or adding a lot of gain and then muddying up or clouding up your tone. You want to have a good, clear tone that's going to sit in the mix correctly. Hopefully that helps. Again, I really think that people have more than they need. It's one thing to say, you know what, I like clones, I like tube screamers, I really like this circuit, and I just have a preference in circuits, and I've got room on my board. That's totally fine. But if you feel like you need more than you do, then you could be putting money and resources into a part of your pedal board that would be better spent on increasing your modulation section, on upgrading maybe your delay or upgrading your compressor. That's the last thing I would put in. Compression is a gain pedal, even though it might not add grit. And so that's something to consider too. Maybe instead of adding especially if you have single coils, if you're using a Telecaster, Jazzmaster, Stratocaster, something like that, if you think, oh, I need to add a gain pedal, maybe you need to add a compressor in the front, and that will give you your bass tone. These are all things to experiment with. There's no right or wrong. It's what works for your style of playing, for how you approach it, what's appropriate to the sound, especially the music at your church, and hopefully this helps. But remember, just because somebody else is doing something, it doesn't mean that that's what you need to do. What you need to find is the solutions that work best for you, your budget, your style of play, and what's appropriate to your church. Thanks for writing in, Edwin. If you are just checking us out on YouTube, check out realworldworship.org. There's all kinds of resources for worship leaders there, and hopefully this has been helpful to you. We'll see you on the website.